And thank you so much, everyone, for coming tonight. My name is Sarah Thomas. I am the Lemon Project Program Manager. We welcome everyone to tonight's Lemon's Legacies Porch Talk, which is a conversation with Angela King of the Virginia Coastal Policy Center. Thank you also to Williamsburg Regional Library, especially Melissa Simpson, Allison Norfolk, and Andrew Smith for partnering to help us spread the word about this year's Porch Talks. So tonight we have Lemon Project Society students alongside Lemon Project graduate assistants who will have this conversation with Angela King. We'll also open it up in the chat. We're open up to questions as well. So this event will be recorded and uploaded to YouTube. And at that time, it will have captions on YouTube. So we cannot offer captions right now, but you can watch it on YouTube with captions. So I want to, before I hand it over to Angela, I want to tell you about Angela's life. She is the Assistant Director of the Virginia Coastal Policy Center, and which is at William Mary's Law School. Before joining the VCPC, Angela served as Assistant Attorney General in the Consumer Protection section of the Virginia Office of the Attorney General, where she focused on charitable solicitation and general consumer protection matters. Her professional experience also includes serving as the executive director of the Newport News Green Foundation and as assistant county attorney for James City County. Before attending law school, Angela worked for a local land surveyor, conducting legal research and field surveys throughout Virginia. And she received her law degree, magna cum laude, from Meagher School of Law at Indiana University, Bloomington, and her Bachelor's of Science in Geography and Anthropology from Florida State University. And she is an active member of the Virginia State Bar. So Angela, do you want to start with your presentation?
That would be great. Thank you, Sarah.
Mm-hmm.
And now I'm just going to try to share my screen. Let me pull that over. And can everybody see that okay? All right. All right. Good evening, everyone. As Sarah said, my name is Angela King, and I'm the Assistant Director of the Virginia Coastal Policy Center at William & Mary Law School. I'd like to thank the Lemon Project for the opportunity to be here with you all this evening. And I think we have about an hour or so together. So I'm just going to start by giving you some background about what VCPC, as we like to call it, because Virginia Coastal Policy Center is a little long. Just some background about what VCPC is, how we're structured, and sampling of the type of projects that we do, and touch on how equity considerations come into play with those projects. So VCPC itself was created about 10 years ago, and it was created really to draw upon the combined expertise of students, scientists, and faculty across William & Mary. And we often like to say that VCPC is at the intersection of science, law, and policy because it's a partnership of the Virginia Institute of Marine Science, which is a graduate program here at William & Mary, Virginia Sea Grant, and William & Mary Law School. We are housed at the law school and we serve as a clinical program for the law students there. And I would like to point out that unlike many environmental law clinics, we are policy focused rather than litigation focused. So what that means is that we're not acting as attorneys in the typical way that you might think of an attorney. We're not taking on clients in the traditional sense that we're working with them on a specific case or a specific topic of litigation. Rather, we are using our resources to conduct legal research and policy analysis and get that information out there so that more informed decision-making can occur at various levels of government. The way that VCPC is structured is that there are, well, actually 3 full-time employees. I didn't update that. There's a director, an assistant director, and then we've recently hired a postgraduate law fellow to help assist us. And we're responsible for really handling the day-to-day operations of VCPC. So this includes managing our research projects, working with students that are involved with VCPC, typically law students, but we also have some PhD students from VIMS that participate in our classes. And then all the fun behind the scenes details, like managing our website, managing social media, putting together grant proposals and grant reports and all of those details. And there are a variety of different ways that law students can be involved with VCPC. We offer both a Practicum 1 and a Practicum 2 course at the law school. During the academic year, students could also coordinate with the director of VCPC to do an independent study, whether that's an independent research or independent writing project. Often students will take this option if for some reason the timing that we're offering the Practicum 1 or the Practicum 2 doesn't fit with their schedule, or if they already have a topic in mind that they would like to work on. And then additionally, we have a team of law students that we call our graduate research fellows that work for us a certain number of hours each week throughout their entire law school career. So all 3 years of law school. And then during the summer, all of our academic year students are of course gone doing their summer jobs. So we typically hire about 3 or 4 full-time research assistants. Again, these are typically law students and usually from William and Mary. And they really help us keep all of the projects going during the summer. We are grant funded. So even though the academic year ends, many of our projects are continuing year round. So it's really critical that we have those students there to help us. Obviously, as a clinical program, a critical goal that we have is to train future citizen lawyers. And what we mean by this is that we want our students to not only have excellent legal skills, but we also want them to be active and engaged citizens that are using the talents and the training that they're receiving in law school to help improve the lives of their communities and those who live around them. The work that our students do can take a variety of different formats. It could be a PowerPoint presentation for a certain audience. It might be helping to develop a set of training or outreach materials, or more traditionally, it could be something like a legal memo or a student white paper. Really, whatever format this analysis takes depends on the audience who is the subject of the research or the grant partners that we may be working on. And then another role that we take on is to highlight issues and bring together stakeholders to find solutions for emerging coastal problems. And we do this by hosting speakers typically, and usually pre-pandemic, holding a large in-person conference in the fall. As a result of what's been happening over the past several months, we have reformatted that conference to be a series of shorter webinars that are available via Zoom. And we're offering those. We had one in September. We're having one next week. And then we have our third one in November. And all of those will be available on our website, as well as all of our past conferences. We have a conferences and events page where you can go see the agenda, see presenters' PowerPoints, and in most cases, see a recording of the actual presentation. Now, just a bit more about student engagement with VCPC and what that looks like. In both practicums, our students have the opportunity to work on real-world projects. These projects can focus on a variety of different topics. Typically, it's going to be water quality, water quantity, shoreline management, aquaculture, and then a larger topic of sea level rise and recurrent flooding. In the classroom, our Practicum 1, which, as you may guess, is the introductory course, includes some traditional lectures about things like the Clean Water Act or aquaculture leasing in Virginia. And Practicum 2 tends to be more of a roundtable discussion. It's a smaller class, so we treat it more like a staff meeting. We talk about current events. The students will do roundtable updates regarding what they're working on. And then for both practicums, we also bring in a variety of guest speakers that talk to the students about what it's actually like to work in the environmental policy field. These speakers might include attorneys that are working as regulators within state agencies, lawyers that might be working as lobbyists for environmental nonprofits, or in some cases, we've brought in a panel of local government staff that might be a planner, an attorney, and an engineer, and had them talk about a specific resilience project and how it's taken shape across those different departments as it's being implemented. And last but not least, we typically plan field trips for our students each semester to help bring some of the topics to life. For example, each semester we, in the past, had taken our students out to the Eastern Shore of Virginia and done an overnight trip. We go out on a boat so that they can see aquaculture firsthand. We also typically do a driving tour so that they can see some of the challenges that our rural communities are facing. Last semester, before the pandemic hit, we had taken them to historic Jamestown to learn about sea level rise and erosion impacts on cultural resources. And then each spring, we typically do a full day in Richmond during the General Assembly session. And we sort of take them around to different spots in the city so they can speak with attorneys that are working at the Attorney General's office, for the Division of Legislative Services, for the Chesapeake Bay Foundation, maybe are a member of the legislature. And then if we have time, we will stay for like a committee hearing so that they can see the legislative process happening firsthand. Unfortunately, these are not things we've been able to do recently, just given the pandemic, but we're still exploring ways that we can bring those issues to life by having guest speakers or like drone footage field trips of sites. So trying to adjust to the changes. And the reason that we think this type of approach is valuable is because we see a variety of benefits from it. Just as a general matter, clinical education is important for law students because it enables them to get hands-on experience with a real-world issue. They can take these sort of maybe more abstract concepts that they're learning in a classroom and see how they apply out in the real world. So that lesson tends to really stick with them. And the interdisciplinary nature of the work that we do also reinforces for the students the importance of teamwork. Law school can often be a very solitary experience. So we find that when we have them work on teams in the practicum, that might be some of the only times they do that in law school. It also helps them improve their communication skills because they're communicating not only with their professor or other law students, but also whatever grant partners might be involved in their project. And then it also teaches the importance of building relationships. Since we are a policy clinic, we often stress to the students that it's all about relationships. It's all about communicating with those people, building trust, and then maintaining that over time. Additional benefit is that the work that we do often focuses on assisting state and local governments. So we're able to use the resources that we have to support staff or organizations that may have limited resources themselves. And we work on a variety of subject matters. If any of you have had the opportunity to look at our reports page, you will see that is very long. I think that we have more than 50 reports posted to that page. And that's not even all of the papers or work products that our students have created. It's just a sampling of them. I've listed some of the specific topics that come to mind for me when I think about equity in our work. But I would say that in pretty much any project that we do, you can find social equity considerations. We don't tend to think of it as a separate area of study. Rather, we find that it pops up in everything that we do and needs to be addressed and incorporated there. So just some of the things on here on this slide, I'll just touch on them briefly. We work with state and federally recognized tribes in Virginia. We work on different planning efforts at the community level. So this might be a comprehensive plan or an evacuation plan. We've looked at the idea of managed retreat and moving individuals or communities out of harm's way and what that looks like. We also often look at water supply and wastewater management. Typically, we are looking at private wells and septic systems because we're looking at this in rural areas where there may not be a centralized system to do those things. And we also more recently have been looking at differences between public outreach and public engagement and what exactly that means. Again, that's an element that comes up in all of the items above it on the list. But rather than me continuing to talk at you about these things, I think we'll move into some of the more interactive elements of this evening's program. But before I do so, I do want to see if anyone just has any general questions about VCPC and how we are structured. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen so I can see you all again. All right. No one has any questions. Everyone knows all there is to know about VCPC. All right. Well, what we're going to try now is I had asked before, some of you may have joined, but whether or not you were familiar with Jamboard. And since we are living in an age where everything is being done by Zoom or GoToWebinar or whatever platform you're using, I've been exposed to a lot of different tools we can use to make these things more interactive. And one that recently came to my attention is this thing called Jamboard. So what I'm going to do is send you all a link via the chat real quick. And what I would ask is that you use this link to open it up on your browser. And I will share my screen again just to show you what it looks like real quick. Maybe. All right. Are you guys able to open the link?
Yeah, I see we have about 15 in here, so.
All right. And you guys can all see that? Okay. So just real quick, like how this operates if you're not familiar with it, and we'll be using it in a pretty, unsophisticated way because I really only know how to use the sticky notes. But over here on the left-hand side, you'll see what looks like a little Post-it. You can click on that and then you could choose like a background color if you wanted, and you would just write your response here in the sticky note and you could save it. And it'll show up on the slide, and then you can move this around to different places. So once we have more responses, we can start grouping them according to topic area. If we're seeing similarities between them. So if everyone wants to humor me and try this out, I'm going to stop sharing again. And I would just ask you all, what comes to mind when you hear the word environmentalism? What type of word comes to mind, or what type of situation, maybe a story, and just please use the Post-it to put those up there. And I'm just going to start moving them around so we can see them. See, now you guys are Jamboard pros at this. All right. And has everybody put, oh, there's still more coming in. All right. And has everybody had a chance to put something into the Jamboard that they'd like to? All right. Oh. So I'm seeing a lot of climate changes. So we could group those together. Seeing waste-free living, which is making an effort to minimize your impact on the environment. See environmental justice. But you get the idea here. We could group things in different ways, and it's been used to then go into breakout groups to have further conversations about those specific topic areas. So I just thought it was a neat tool to get people sort of thinking about the topic of today's talk. So we're going to do that again, but instead this time, I'd like to hear from you all about what comes to mind when you hear the word justice. And you can do the same thing of just selecting the sticky note.
So we click to the next slide at the
Oh,
top.
sorry. Yeah, you up at the top, you'll see like a 1 out of 2. You'll just click over to the right. Yeah. There we go. We're seeing a lot of the same types of phrasing coming up, which is good. And I guess the purpose in doing this little exercise was really to break up the phrase environmental justice and think about sort of the two separate parts that are involved, and give some thought to, when you think of those as separate concepts, when you think of the environment and you think of justice separately, and you see these words that make you think of those things, where are those overlaps between those two different concepts? And also on the flip side, and probably more importantly, where are there disconnects? Where are we seeing that these two like thoughts or phrases may not be completely in line? I think it's interesting that we're seeing a lot of equity and equality coming up on the justice slide. And I'm sure many of you have seen the meme comparing the difference between equity and equality and how those don't necessarily mean the same thing. So that's just something to keep in mind. But thank you for humoring me as we go through that exercise. I'll keep it up in the background in case we use it again. And now I think we'll just turn over to the Q&A portion of the talk. So.
Great. That was great. Thank you. Kelsey, would you like to get started?
Yeah, I'm Kelsey. I am a Lemon Project Society member. I'm also a public policy and environmental policy major. So I'm curious about how the interdisciplinary nature of your work affects your ability to address race and inequality or justice.
Great question. And I touched on it a little bit like in the presentation about how the interdisciplinary nature of the work benefits the students. But I think just in general, working across disciplines brings in different perspectives to whatever you're looking at. So you'll have different ways of approaching an issue, different ideas as far as developing a solution. And I think that having that interdisciplinary aspect to the project can really only benefit the ability for the project to better address issues of race and inequality. Where I think projects can be like even further strengthened is by not only bringing in different perspectives of the disciplines that are involved, but also different lived experiences of the stakeholders who are being impacted by the issue that you're looking at. And one example I would give of a project that we work on is called the RAFT, which is short for the Resilience Adaptation Feasibility Tool. We love our acronyms. There are so many acronyms. But this is a project that brings together not only different disciplines, but also different stakeholders. So the overall goal of the RAFT project is to help Virginia coastal localities improve their resilience to flooding and other types of coastal storm hazards. And we often call it a full service tool because there are 3 steps. We start by using a scorecard that we've developed to do a resilience assessment, like what is their current level of resilience. And then in the second step, we hold a community workshop where we go over the findings of the scorecard and we ask attendees of the workshop to develop a list of items they could do over the next year or so to make themselves more resilient. And then in the third step, we stick with them for a year to help them implement those things that they've identified. So the way that this project brings in different disciplines is that it's managed by this academic collaborative team that includes us at Vcpc, as well as our partners at the Institute for Engagement and Negotiation at the University of Virginia, and then at the Virginia Sea Grant Climate Adaptation and Resilience Program at Old Dominion University. So each of these partners, VCPC, UVA, and ODU, bring a different set of skills to the project. For example, we can do legal research and policy analysis. Our partners at UVA can help with mapping assistance or meeting facilitation. And then our partners at ODU specialize in science communication and community outreach. So we all bring a different set of skills to the table. And then the way that we bring in community stakeholders and get their perspectives in the project is via those second and third steps. So the workshop, we try to make it as inclusive as possible as far as who we're inviting. It may be locality staff, elected officials, residents, business owners, community groups, state agencies that are active there, nonprofits that are active there. We try to invite as many people as possible to be involved and have their voices at the table. And then in implementation, we work with a smaller subset of that group that attended the workshop to serve as the implementation team. And again, that implementation team will usually include different representatives from those sectors. So elected official, local staff, resident, business owner. That way, everyone has a unique perspective on the project and how it's being implemented, and we can keep them involved throughout the course of the year that we work with them. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, Joseph.
Yes. Hello, everyone. My name is Joseph Nguyen. I'm a fourth-year biology major, and I'm a student in the Lebanon Project Society. So I'm wondering, in addition to some of the things you've already discussed, what are some things that we can do as community members in our everyday lives to help combat this form of environmental injustice?
Right, that's a great question. And I'll probably start to sound like a broken record at some point, but I think one of the best things that we can do is simply to communicate with each other, to really get outside of your comfort zone and make connections with members of a community that you think may be experiencing an injustice or be at risk of experiencing one. And when I say communicate with them, I mean like really talk to them and actively listen to what they're telling you. And once you have a better idea of what it is they're experiencing, and maybe they don't know why they're experiencing it, maybe you can help them identify that. Maybe they have certain ideas of activities or things that would help them, and you could help those happen. Or maybe they need help coming up with those ideas. You don't really know till you have that conversation with them. And I find that often just going through the process of opening up those channels of communication can be very beneficial. Even if at times it feels like you're not getting a lot of work done, just having someone there to listen to you and hear what you're going through can be very therapeutic for people. And you might realize that you have connections to resources that could help them that you didn't even know you had. So I would just say talking to people and really listening to what they have to tell you.
All right, Molly.
Hi, everyone. My name is Molly. I'm the American Studies graduate assistant for the Lemon Project this year. In one of the reports that I was looking at by the Vcpc, there's sort of a comparison drawn between New Orleans and Norfolk, or at least using New Orleans as a model for approaching coastal Virginia.
Mm-hmm.
And part of the discussion is how people of color and poor people often disproportionately bear the burdens of environmental hazards, as we see with the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina. And I'm wondering how the Vcpc might take into account the narratives that we see come out of situations like that, where people are blamed for environmental disasters,
Right.
and how an approach that's specifically environmental and legal and interdisciplinary, how we can create narratives to avoid that, how we interact with environmental hazards in ways that sort of better reflect how people are part of the environment and
Right.
face different consequences as a result of their social position.
Right. No, that's also a great question. And I think like one thing to keep in mind, even when you're just thinking about this issue, is the idea of physical risk and socioeconomic risk. So physical risk is going to be very specific to the location that you're in. So obviously in New Orleans, you may be more at risk for a hurricane or a flooding event, while maybe if you're located in a different part of the country, you might be more at risk for something like a wildfire. Now, on the socioeconomic side, there could be a variety of different factors that could increase your vulnerability with respect to that physical risk. So maybe it's that you don't have your own transportation. Maybe it's that you have an elderly person living in your house that needs assistance to do something like evacuate, or a lot of young children in your house that need assistance to help evacuate. So just keeping those like two sets of factors in mind, and how the presence of the socioeconomic factors can really multiply the physical risk that you and your neighbors might be subject to. And the idea that someone that's been impacted by a natural disaster would be blamed for being impacted is just unfortunate, to say in the least, because I think it's obviously much easier to look back on something and decide that you would have reacted differently, that you would have done it, the right way. But we don't really know how we would react to something unless we've already experienced it. And also, even if we have experienced an evacuation or something, we don't necessarily know how another person might react because we don't know their situation. We don't know what they might be dealing with outside of the disaster that's happening. So there's actually a little role playing that I would like to do in response to this question. And I'm borrowing this from Dr. Sarah Stafford, who is the chair of the William and Mary Economics Department. She often comes to speak to our class and talk about the interplay between different types of vulnerability. And this is an exercise that she does with the students. So I would ask if you're able to turn your video on, because part of this will involve doing things like raising your hand. So if you could humor me and turn your video on, that would be great. If not, that's fine too. But so I'm just going to walk you through a little exercise, and then at different points, I'm going to ask you questions and have you raise your hand. So just pretend that you're in your living room. It's a Sunday evening. You're just watching TV, hanging out, and you get an alert on your phone that the area that you live in is under a mandatory evacuation. And you have until noon tomorrow to get out of your house. So I just want everybody to take a couple minutes and think about what you would do in that situation. What would your evacuation plan be? So you have, less than 24 hours. Think about what you would take with you. Do you have pets that you need to take with you? Do you have maybe like parents or siblings that you need to take with you? How would you get to where you're going? Where would you go? And keep in mind that the evacuation order is for, say, 3 or 4 days. So you need to be gone for 3 or 4 days. So I'm going to give you guys a couple minutes, write it down if you need to. And then when we get back together, I'm just going to throw out some different complications and see how those impact your evacuation plan. All right. Does everybody have their plan, or does anybody need more time? All right. Don't see anyone shaking their head. So now what I'm going to do is just add some additional complications. And if this complication would impact your plan to the point where it would not work, I want you to just raise your hand, and you could either raise your actual hand, or if you know how to raise your hand in the Zoom, you can also do that. So first, let's say you do have money in a car, but you just moved to the area recently, and all of your friends and family, everyone that you know, lives across the country. So it would be like a 5-hour flight to get to them. So driving is not an option. So if your plan involved driving like just outside of the evacuation zone to stay with friends or family, raise your hand. So I'm seeing several hands. So this is just something to keep in mind for people that may be new to the area or even new to the country and not have that support system close by. They may not have that as an option whenever they're facing an evacuation in a short amount of time. So that would be an additional consideration for them to take into account. What would they do in those situations? Now let's add in a different complication. Let's say you do have some money, but it's only $300. That's all you have, whether it's cash or available on your debit card. You have no other access to money. Your credit cards are maxed out. So would your plan still work if you only had $300? Would that be enough for, say, the gas that you needed, or if your plan was to stay in a hotel to cover hotel rooms for a few days, to cover food? Would $300 be enough for you? Raise your hand if it wouldn't. I'm still seeing some hands. I don't think I can see everybody at the same time, but I'm still seeing hands. All right. And then finally, another complication. Let's say you don't have a car. So whose plan involved them having a car to evacuate? And this is probably where I'm seeing the most hands. So obviously, if you don't have your own car to evacuate, you're really at the whim of, maybe finding a friend who has a vehicle or some form of transportation, using public transportation. But then how might using public transportation impact your ability to bring all the things with you that you wanted to bring, maybe the ability to bring your pet with you? So this is really just meant to be an example of some of the things that maybe we take for granted that would be real problems for other people if they needed to make a plan to evacuate in a short amount of time. So it's not always as simple as it looks, is the point, I guess. And then another way to think about it, and this is another thing that Dr. Stafford often does with the students, is instead of, responding to an emergency, let's think about recovery from an emergency. So let's say your house has been destroyed by a fire. Everything in it is gone. Would you have insurance on your house or even on the contents of your house so that you would have the resources to begin the rebuilding process? So raise your hand if you would have insurance to cover those things. Seeing some hands, seeing some frowns. Yeah. And let's say you did have insurance to cover it, so you might have some monetary resources to help out. Would you have a place to stay over, say, the course of 6 months while your house was being rebuilt and repaired? Yeah. All right. Would you be able to take paid time off work during those 6 months so that you could facilitate the rebuilding of your house and the move? So again, those are all just different factors that some of us may take for granted that would really make it a challenge for other populations. And I think I saw a question in the chat. Has anyone ever had to do a mandatory evacuation for real? And if so, would you mind sharing that experience with us? No, no one?
I had to evacuate and I just drove 4 hours.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it was still very stressful, but I was living in a rented house at that point. So I wasn't too concerned about my living situation, but I had, a place to stay and I had a car to get me there. So.
Yeah, I mean, I myself have never had to do one, so I don't have anything to add to that one. Thank you for sharing that, Sarah. And just some statistics to put all of this into perspective. The majority of households that evacuated in advance of Hurricane Irma reported spending more than $300 to evacuate. So that's why I was asking the question about the $300 limit. But there is research out there that shows that around 40% of households in the United States would have trouble coming up with that much money on the spot without having to borrow it from someone or without having to sell something in order to get that money. And it's not really just the cost of evacuation that are an issue. There's also a significant portion of households that are just unprepared for a natural disaster. And this also is often correlated to household income. Statistics show that of households that make more than $80,000 a year, about 2/3 claim that they're prepared for a natural disaster, although less than 20% of them actually have disaster insurance to cover those types of losses. And then of the households that make less than 80,000, more than half said that they were unprepared for a natural disaster. And again, this just brings to mind thinking about those physical and socioeconomic risks when you're thinking about disaster response. So to get back to the initial question, thanks for doing that exercise with me. I think what we could do to better prepare more vulnerable populations to respond or to recover, or what we could do to help prevent judgments or blame about this, is to do a better job of recognizing these different types of vulnerabilities, these like social factors, and taking those into account when plans are being developed. So we could do more to involve those populations in planning efforts. We can do more to listen to their situations and their needs. And then we can incorporate that information into a more robust plan of action that matches with the reality of what they're living with. And oftentimes, if someone's involved in the creation of a plan, they're going to have more buy-in to it. They're going to be more likely to follow it. And even if someone's not involved in the plan, but they hear it from a trusted member of their community, they're going to be more likely to know what's happening and know what to do if something like that happens. So just having that information and that coordination will enable those populations to be better prepared and to be able to recover from a disaster that they might experience.
All right, Caroline, I'm gonna turn it to you to ask your question. I'm also reminding everyone that we're accepting questions in the chat. So do you wanna go ahead, Caroline?
Sure. First of all, I'd like to say I really enjoy the interactive parts of this presentation. So thank you for that. My question is kind of related to vulnerability, like we've been discussing. I was reading through some of the reports and I really just got to thinking about all of the terrible things happening and that have happened in Flint, Michigan with like access to clean water and everything. And I'm wondering if you can speak just generally, because my knowledge on it is not great, but if you can speak generally to like the ways that rising sea levels impede access to clean water sources and how they kind of, so how rising sea levels impede access to clean and potable water. Mm-hmm. And do you have structures in place to kind of pinpoint geographically or even predict where certain neighborhoods or areas are that are going to be most affected by like an impeded access to clean water? So
yeah. So I can't say that VCPC personally has like those types of maps or tools out there, but our partners at VIMS have a variety of like models and maps that are available that can show different things like sea level rise impacts or storm surge impacts. So if you're interested in exploring those, there's a website called adaptva, like for Virginia.org. And it has a variety of information there. In addition to the maps, there are sections about like policy and legal analysis that we've assisted with. So it's a really great resource that's specific to Virginia. And then of course, there are various other tools and mapping out there where you can see different types of impacts, and they'll often have different types of data layers that could tell you, whether, populations there are socially vulnerable and maybe even the specific factor that makes them socially vulnerable. It can tell you things about like green infrastructure, tree canopy cover. So there are lots of resources out there, but back to the topic of water, it's not just drinking water, it's also wastewater management, which not a lot of people talk about, but we tend to talk about a lot in class. Our research is focused more on private wells for drinking water and then on-site septic systems for wastewater management, rather than the centralized systems that you all may be more familiar with living in a city. But these methods of water supply and wastewater management that we typically see in rural areas are at risk of things like sea level rise and recurrent flooding. With private wells, something called saltwater intrusion can occur. And this obviously will impact the household using the well and their access to clean water. You can think about it this way. I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with private wells, but they're going to be dug down to a certain depth to reach a groundwater aquifer. And when it reaches that fresh water, that's the source of clean water for that house. But in coastal areas, there's this risk of saltwater intrusion into that groundwater aquifer as the sea levels rise. So if the water in that well becomes too salty, obviously it's no longer drinkable, and often it means the well is abandoned, and that household may be in a situation where they need to dig a new well, which costs money, or maybe they need to be, bringing in clean water from an outside source, which also costs money. With on-site septic systems, sea level rise and recurrent flooding also impact the ability of those types of systems to function properly. So I don't know if any of you are familiar with septic systems and how they operate, but I am definitely not an engineer, so can't explain this technically. But if you think about a septic system, it has various elements that are underground. There's typically, pipes coming from the house, a tank, more pipes, and a drain field around the system. And what happens is wastewater exits the house from the pipes, just like normal sewer system in the city. But then it goes into the tank, and the tank has these things called baffles in it, so that like the more solid material settles on the bottom, the different byproducts rise up to the top. And then the additional wastewater that's called the effluent continues to flow through the tank, goes out through the pipes, and is distributed into the drain field. Basically, the drain field is just a large area of soil that will further filter the effluent so that it's no longer a threat to public health. But obviously, it's very dependent on the actual type of soil that the drain field is made out of. So there's certain requirements. Your lot would be tested to see if the soil would be proper for installation of a septic tank. So whenever you have flooding happening on your property, or say your drain field was subject to sea level rise, that's obviously impacting the ability of that drain field to function properly, meaning that the wastewater in your yard may not be filtering properly. In some cases could be just sitting in the yard. And, this is an issue for a variety of reasons. Not only does it not smell the best, but it's also a public health concern, because there are various, bacteria, viruses, and parasites that could live in that wastewater. And if it's out in your yard and say you're walking around in it, you could get sick from that. If it's close to your private well, which serves as your drinking water source, it could potentially contaminate that. If you're close to a water body where maybe there is an aquaculture operation going on, it could result in condemnation of that water body, so that aquaculture farmer could not harvest his oysters. So there's a variety of different issues that could arise there. And I know that typically there are not the best records about where all of those wells or those septic systems are, or maybe even the year they were constructed and how they're functioning. So I know there are efforts underway to get a better handle on locating those different systems and overlaying that with mapping that we do have about sea level rise and storm surge impacts. so that efforts could be undertaken to have a better idea of the scope of, say, repair needed, or, maybe outreach to certain community members. Because I think one other issue, especially with the septic systems, is homeowners may be hesitant to report that they have a problem because it can be, a very personal issue. They might feel like people are going to judge them because of it. So there's also definitely a human element there that needs to be taken into consideration.
I want to ask a question that was pre-submitted ahead of time about what stories would you like a historian to tell?
So it might seem odd to bring like history, like historical stories and law together, but I think that these can be very beneficial, especially when we're talking about sea level rise and resilience, because hearing directly from people that have lived in that community for a long time and hearing how things have changed over time can be very helpful. We've seen this in that project, The Raft, that we work on, that we get much more traction with community members if we are able to relate the data or the science that we're showing them to something they've seen with their own eyes. So if we can get those historical stories about, this waterway looked like this when I was growing up, or, the water only came up to this level on the dock and now it comes up to here, those stories can go a really long way in getting more information from the community to make the science better, but also being able to communicate the science in a way that they understand and then they trust more. So it would be great to go into especially these rural communities and collect those stories and get that information before it's gone. And also to hear about how their communities like adjusted to those events, or, if there was a hurricane while they were growing up, what their community did to respond and recover, because it's going to be different for each community, and helping them identify what worked and then tweak it to develop a better plan for the future can go a long way. So I think it's great to bring those stories in and to collect them in some way, especially now that we have so much technology, doing things like story maps, where you could have a website with different locations for the people telling the story and make that accessible to a lot of people. And it's just another way to open up those channels of communication.
Cool. We have a question in the chat. We're running out of time, but if you could just answer this one, I think it'll be a quick answer. Do you train lobbyists or do you direct lobbying?
So we do not do either of those things. So as part of our sort of connection to Virginia Sea Grant, we do not do any advocacy work. So you'll often find with our like student white papers, they're going to be very objective looking at an issue. And then if you do get to a section that is like recommendations or conclusions, they will be phrased in a manner to be set up like, if your goal is X, then these are your potential options, A, B, and C, and might point out the pros or cons of the different options, but typically would not go as far as selecting what would be, the ideal option, unless it's tied to a specific policy goal. So recently we had students do a couple of papers focused on increasing aquaculture production in Virginia. So to the extent the goal of those papers was to identify changes or tweaks to existing frameworks in order to increase production, they did propose options that would result in that. But again, they weren't pushing for a specific path forward, more of just an identification exercise.
Okay, does anyone have any other questions they'd like to ask Angela?
Is anyone planning on going to law school?
Can you all hear me?
Yes.
This is Ernest Thompson. I reside down in the lower end of Newport News, the Peninsula area, and we are in the process right now of doing a major renovation and redoing homes and everything in this area. And it's always been polluted. You can imagine Black communities have always been impacted by industrial waste, sites that are adjacent to where we live. Matter of fact, it's all waterfront property. We right on the James River. And so what I'm trying to find out is, as we begin to revitalize and rebuild the areas, is how we can study the waters and the impact of all these pollutants, both in the aquifers and in the rivers that flow around it, and do some abatement from data-driven things that you all do at the school. How can you all be or how can we interact with you all to begin to pursue some remedies before we actually build, to address those things before we begin to actually building these projects?
Right. No, that's a great question, Ernest. And I'm so glad that you're on this call so that we can connect with each other. So the projects that we work on stem from a variety of different ways. We might be contacted by, say, a state agency or a local government about a specific research question. We might be contacted by other academic institutions about a grant proposal that they want to coordinate on. And then, and more importantly, we might be contacted by a grassroots organization or a member of a community that has a question. So I can definitely set up a time to speak with you, Ernest, and talk more about it and get a better handle on, say, what's already been done and what next steps might be, and see to the extent that VCPC could help with that, or if it would be more fitting to try to connect you with some of our science partners for things like water quality sampling. There may even be other nonprofit organizations like the James River Association that we could connect you with that might have some programs underway. So I'd be happy to have those conversations with you. I don't know, Sarah, does everyone have like my email address or? Yeah, okay.
I have everyone's email address. But your email address is also on your.
Oh yeah, it's on my thing because I never changed it.
Yeah.
But it'd be great to connect and talk about this more. I think the revitalization you're referring to.
Hi.
Oh, there he is. Okay.
I didn't want you to think you were talking to the ghost.
It is almost Halloween. Yeah. No, I was just going to say, are you referring to the Choice Neighborhood Initiatives project?
Absolutely. Matter of fact, I'm the chairman of the Citizens Advisory Committee for the Choice Neighborhood Initiative. And there's a lot going on down here. We have I'm trying to get some of this light out my face. Woo, that's better. There's a lot going on down here this weekend. Matter of fact, at the Achievable Dreams Tennis Academy, the architects and a lot of people are coming in. But people so often miss the infrastructure, that underground aquifers and stuff that feeds our communities and also clean our communities. So what we want to do is get on top of that, because generally in these kinds of environments, especially in poor neighborhoods, they do it after the fact. They build all these kinds of things, highways protrude and inject themselves into our communities and all that. Then they start talking about the environmental impact that these things are having on the community. And that's hindsight. And so what I'm really trying to do is to get in front of it this time and to really address these concerns prior to building. So any and everything that you can hook me up with, and we can get our committee engaged with you all to try to find solutions and data-driven solutions to our potential problems.
No, when is your next Citizens Advisory Committee? Do you know?
The Citizens Advisory Committee we have next is on the 20th. We have, but once I reach out to you all, I'm the one that, with my secretary, set the agenda. So once we all talk, then we can get you all involved in it, so the presentation can be made and we can discuss some ways and avenues of pursuing, so that we can become the solution rather than a result of something somebody else has done.
Right. No, definitely being proactive rather than reactive. Once a problem hits is better. And I know we're out of time, sorry. But I will connect with you offline, Ernest, so we can
Okay.
have a conversation and see how we could coordinate on something.
I
Well,
sent you.
Yeah, my email. I filled my email in.
Right. Yes.
Okay, great.
I sent your email, Mr. Thompson, to Angela, so she has it.
So
Hey,
I will
guys,
be reaching out.
appreciate you, and I always thank Sade Reed. She always hooks me up with what's going on in the campuses. She
Oh, I'm
said,
so
"Ernest, you need
glad.
to-" God
That's
bless her.
great.
She really helps.
She put a heart up. Yeah.
And there's Sade. This is great. Well, thank you so much to everyone. Thank you for speaking up, Mr. Thompson. Thank you for everyone who came. Thank you to Kelsey and Joseph and Caroline and Molly for asking questions. And thank you especially to Angela for doing this Lemons Legacies Porch Talk with us. And we hope you all have a great evening.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.